Hello again, friends. I don't usually do this type of in-depth analysis where instead of analyzing the rulings behind a card, I'm letting you know why a card is suboptimal to play in nearly every single aspect of its design, but I felt like this card was enough of a trap that looked good enough on paper that I should warn potential players from getting too deep into playing around with it. The card that I'm referencing is, of course, Snek Princess Setsuna. Let's read the card. When this card enters the field, you may pay 1 gauge. If you do, call a size 1 or less Skull Warrior from your drop zone by paying its call cost. At the end of your turn, destroy this card. Naturally, we have a good point of reference to compare this with. This card accomplishes a similar function to Return to the Underworld. Let's read that card. Set, this card remains on the field. Act, you may pay 1 gauge. If you do, call a size 1 or less Skull Warrior from your drop zone without paying its call cost. This ability may only be used once per turn. So let's list out the differences between the cards. Setsuna has a 3/1/1 body and is a Skull Warrior attribute card for effects that require that. Return to the Underworld is a Demon Way set spell for effects that require that. Let's observe them in a completely vanilla environment. Both of them have the same cost of only 1 gauge to revive a monster. Both revive a size 1 or less only. Setsuna's advantage is that she is a Skull Warrior for cards that need other Skull Warriors out, such as Jugen Rensa, Natsubame, and Arakuyo. She also has a 1 critical body and can be a prime to darkness target for either Yamagitsune, since if they're going to let an attack hit, it's probably going to be hers. Return to the Underworld's advantages are that you don't have to pay the call cost of a card called through it. Setsuna has to pay 3 gauge and sack a monster to bring out the new Impact Yamagitsune, whereas Return just needs to pay a gauge. Also, Return doesn't die at the end of turn, so you can turn your Temp +1s into multiple Temp +1s, or even permanent +1s and Temp +1s with combinations of Natsubame or either size 1 Yamagitsune. So the long and short is that compared to Underworld, Setsuna's only advantage is that if you have no other ability to call any other monsters, she's a 1 crit body and can self-proc Natsubame from hand, to potentially give you a little bit more reach and recoverability if you somehow lost all of your cards through some crazy play like Ragnarok. Situations that most decks don't typically account for anyway. And I know some of you are thinking, Tim, that's great and all, but anyone can see that Return is better than Setsuna. The idea is that you want to revive Setsuna with Underworld to get more bang for your buck. Actually, this is suboptimal every single time you do it. There isn't a single situation in which calling Setsuna off of Return is ever the right play. Unlike base Setsuna from hand, which has a few outlying cases of being better than Return, if we're comparing Setsuna and Return to a certain other combination of 2 cards, Setsuna loses every single time. This combination is Return to the Underworld and Undying Benny Shoujo. Benny Shoujo existing in the same set as Setsuna is what made Setsuna hopelessly obsolete before she ever had a chance to be played. Let's read Undying Benny Shoujo. Act. If this card is in your drop zone, you may pay 1 gauge. If you do, call this card from your drop zone. At the end of your turn, destroy this card. Let's break this down into all scenarios. Scenario 1. You have 2 gauge and you want to call out a monster that costs no gauge. In this case, you can use Return on Setsuna, then have her call out the new unit. In this case, you can also return out whatever unit Setsuna was going to call, then use Benny Shoujo to bring itself back from the drop zone, and you get 2,000 more power and an extra critical every single time for the exact same cost. It's not just about the bigger body though. Benny Shoujo can wait until after the new unit is called. So let's say you have no board, but you have 1 gauge. You call out Hyunmaru with Return. You get 1 gauge from that. Now you can call out Benny Shoujo. Setsuna can't do this because she needs the gauge Hyunmaru would have given her to call out Hyunmaru. And again, Benny Shoujo doesn't lose any versatility because it can still be called first to proc your Natsubames. There are even more scenarios in which Benny Shoujo flat out wins in all cases. Let's talk about grabbing either Yamagitsune back from the drop zone. Return nullifies the call cost, but if you're using Return to grab Setsuna, you would then have to pay a 2nd gauge and whatever their call cost might be. Now, there is one scenario that I can think of where Setsuna edges out slightly, but you have to have a Return to the Underworld on the board, no other cards in hand, and that 1 crit attack is enough to secure the game for you. You somehow have the gauge for all of this, and this requires Setsuna to be in your hand, and you to be in some wacky scenario with close to no board where the 3k attack or the 1 crit is actually going to make the difference for game. Setsuna in the drop zone is literally always inferior to Benny Shoujo every single time. In conclusion, I rate Snek Princess Setsuna an obsolete out of 10. Now, do I think it's a bad card? No, it's just an okay card. But right now, Skull Warriors are struggling to meet that balance between space and consistency. Hyunmaru needs to be maxed. Benny Shoujo is literally the best tool Skulls have ever gotten, and should always be at 4. Obviously, Yamagitsune is still a valuable tool to turn your temp plussing into hard plussing and bait removal and counter cards. Currently, the Ninja Arts engine is so incredibly anti-meta that I think Shiden is mandatory for Skulls as well, so that you can run all of the hate spells and filter out the ones that aren't good for your particular matchup. Movers are still very nice to have, and you obviously need to have Natsubame for card draw. I don't think there's enough space to justify Setsuna in any Skulls builds due to other options simply being better. From Hand, Return to the Underworld, and Odd Ritual Skull Festival are superior cards with direct searchers. You can search Setsuna out of the deck and send her straight to the drop zone, but you can't get Setsuna out of the drop zone without another copy of herself, Water Ploy, or one of the aforementioned better cards. So the toolboxing aspect doesn't work out in Setsuna's favor, since you have to have one of the better versions of it to toolbox itself out, which I've already proven is suboptimal in every single case. From the drop zone, Setsuna is always inferior to Benny Shoujo. It's not even that Setsuna is a bad card, but it's just hopelessly obsolete in the face of other better Skull Warriors support. That's it for this analysis of Setsuna. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.